What's up guys, and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I decided to finally sit down and share with you my frozen embryo transfer story. This was my second attempt at IVF. So if you haven't seen my previous IVF videos, I'm gonna link those all down below in the description box, as well as pop them up in the cards every once in a while. And I also realized that I have yet to mention on YouTube that I did start a podcast called Infertile Millennial, which is basically just talking about my journey through IVF, talking about other people's journeys, talking about different things I've had to deal with and experience. So if you're interested in listening to that and learning more about my journey and all of that, you can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, Google, and Anchor.fm. Alright, so if you want to hear all about my frozen embryo transfer, then just keep watching because we're going to get started. So my frozen embryo transfer was a roller coaster. Typically, a frozen embryo transfer should be super easy, way easier than like a fresh for sure, because there's just a whole lot less prep work. You're basically just waiting to do like the frozen transfer. So we kind of went into this thinking like, this is going to be a breeze, this is going to be so easy, and joke's on us. When I tell you that the months of January through like April were the worst and most emotional time of my life, I'm not joking. So this is probably going to be kind of long. That's just because I have so much to tell you and just so much happened in a period of time that is still unbelievable to me to this day. So I started my second IVF cycle, which was my frozen embryo transfer, in January, and we were scheduled to have our frozen embryo transfer on February 13th of this year. And because I found out that I had endometriosis during my first IVF cycle, I knew that I was going to have another hysteroscopy surgery done, which is basically a pretty easy surgery. You do go under for it, but they go in there and they remove any scar tissue so that you have a really nice canvas to help your embryo implant with. And because our first IVF cycle failed and we were only 25 years old, our doctor put us on an implantation protocol because there really was no reason for our first one to fail, especially when we had such beautifully graded embryos. So we went into our second IVF cycle with 7 frozen embryos. My hysteroscopy surgery was scheduled for January 17th, so we went in there like normal. At this point, I was super used to the process because, like I said, I had the surgery before, and I also had gone under for the egg retrieval, and both times was no different from the other, so I was pretty much knew what to expect, and I was ready to just get the surgery done so that we could move on to the transfer. I believe it was during that surgery they discovered that I did have some polyps in there, but again, that's super easy, they can remove that, and so they basically said everything looked beautiful and we're ready to move on for your transfer. So we were really excited, and I remember just going home and the nurse calling me the next week telling me that Wednesday the 22nd I was to give myself 1 injection. This injection is pretty big. I will insert a picture here. It's a one-time thing that you put in your lower back or your upper back hip, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know. And basically what it does is it stops your body from ovulating because, like I said, we already had embryos frozen, so they didn't need to get any eggs out of me this time. So I did that injection on the 22nd, and on the 25th, it was a Saturday morning, I see that my nurse is calling me. It's not super out of the ordinary for your nurse to call you like every single day. You basically are talking to your nurse like every single day. So it wasn't super out of the normal, but it was weird that it was a Saturday and it was so early. So I answer the phone call, and she's basically telling me that because we had failed the first cycle, they wanted to do a biopsy of my uterine lining. And when they did that, they discovered that there was inflammation in my lining that showed that it was chronic, and that is a telltale sign of chronic endometritis, which is inflammation of the lining due to an infection. And it's super odd to have an infection in your uterus because it is so sterile. So in my mind, I'm thinking, how the heck did I get this? Like, where did this come from? Basically, it can happen from doing IVF procedures in the past because that's so invasive. There's lots of catheters that are going in and out of there, different things. And so I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. But nonetheless, what my nurse told me was that basically in order to move on with the transfer, and because our embryos are so delicate and I worked so hard to get them, that they wanted to put me on 10 days of antibiotics that were super strong, and I'll get into that in a minute. And basically, I would have to be on those antibiotics and then 10 days later have another surgery. So I wasn't super thrilled about that, but because we really wanted this to work, we were like, yeah, whatever you say, we trust you. Let's do the surgery again to see if the inflammation has gone away. So immediately I get put on 2 antibiotics. One is Flagyl and one is ciprofloxacin. Those are both super potent antibiotics, and I was on 2,000 milligrams per day. When I tell you I have never felt worse in my life than taking those, I cannot explain to you the hell that I went through being on antibiotics for 2 days. And listen, I know how to take antibiotics. When you go through IVF, you're on them all the time for just many different reasons. So I know, like, you have to eat before and you should drink water and all that. I, no matter what I did, had the worst migraine for 10 days straight. I never got relief. I had constant nausea. I could not eat. I was throwing up. I mean, it was just so bad. And then come to find out that's like a huge symptom, or it's a side effect from Flagyl. So I never want to be on that antibiotic again. I remember when I was only halfway through my 10 days, I was crying to my husband saying, if this does not work, I cannot go on these again. And the only reason I suffered through them was because I wanted this to work. So I really just kind of like strengthened up and just did it. So once the 10 days were over, my next surgery was scheduled for, I think it was the 28th of January. So again, we drove an hour and a half away to get this surgery. It was pretty quick according to my husband, because again, I'm out. I have no idea what's going on. And we're feeling pretty good about this. I felt so good because those antibiotics just really kicked my butt. So I felt like there's no way that this inflammation is not gone. So I wait for my biopsy results, and again, on a Saturday morning, my nurse calls me. I think it's February 1st at this point, and she calls to let me know that the antibiotics did not touch a thing. I still had chronic inflammation, and at this point, I was getting really upset because it just started to feel like everything was against us, and I'm like, so what do we do now? Because I just did these antibiotics. Clearly they didn't work. They're super potent. I cannot imagine why they're not working, and they couldn't either. They said that not only is it really rare to have chronic endometritis, but it's really rare for it to not work. And I was the very first patient of theirs ever for antibiotics not to clear this. So I was starting to feel really down. I was like, this is just feeling impossible at this point. So my nurse basically says you have 2 options. One option is to go on a different type of antibiotic again for like 7 days, have another biopsy, see what happens. Or you can again go on the antibiotics for 7 days and not have a surgery and just continue with the transfer. In my head, I wanted to do the surgery because I wanted to have peace of mind of what was going on, and if my doctor, if results came back and they said, you still have this, we don't think you should do a transfer at all, then I would be fine with that as well. So my husband and I together decided, yes, let's do one more surgery and see if this new round of antibiotics is going to work. So I was put on a different antibiotic for 7 days. I felt fine on that one, thank God. And our surgery was scheduled for February 14th, which was Valentine's Day. So not super romantic, but again, this was like, we just wanted to get this job done. So I have my surgery on February 14th, and I'm feeling super good. I feel like I have a really good feeling that this is going to work this time, and we're feeling pretty good about it. I'm in good spirits, and right before I walk in to have surgery, my doctor tells me that he thinks that no matter the outcome, we should just move on with the transfer, because 3 surgeries in less than 2 months is overkill, and this is a lot of antibiotics that you've been on for at this point, I've been on so many antibiotics, I don't even know if my body would accept them anymore. So he just said, like, we just have to move on. And we both agreed. At this point, I'm extremely tired of having to get surgery and put under and being on this medication. I'm like, yes, I just want to move on, because at this point, we're just going to have to leave it up to fate because there's clearly nothing we can do after this point. So we're all on the same page and everything's feeling good. I had the surgery, we go home, we're feeling good. So because we had all been on the same page and agreed that yes, we're going to move forward no matter what the results are, my nurse has me come in, I think that following Wednesday, which was, let me see what day that was. That was, I think it was like the 19th of February at this point. So I have already gone past what was supposed to be my embryo transfer day, and at this point I'm just like, I want to get to the transfer because I feel like I've tried everything. So I go into my nurse's office, we take a look at my ovaries and my uterus, and everything is looking amazing, and she said that all they have to do is talk to the doctor and figure out a date, but they were thinking March 5th. So I'm super excited. I actually went to this appointment without my husband, and I was really excited to tell him the news that I think we have a transfer date, and so I was very excited. So I remember being, at home, and the nurse is calling me, and I'm getting really excited to hear her say, yes, okay, let's move on, let's start the medication. And as soon as I answer the phone, she has a just super unsettling tone in her voice. And I'm like, what now? Because I thought we were on the same page, right? So she says, you know what? We got your biopsy results back, and you still have chronic endometritis. And I'm like, okay, because I'm like, yes, I understand that was going to be a chance, but we had agreed that we were going to move forward. And so that's why I was like, okay. And she's like, and honestly, the doctor is just really uncomfortable with the result, and we need to cancel your transfer, and we actually think you need to come in on Monday to have a talk with the doctor. Now, at this point, I'm actually starting to get really nervous, because what my nurse had mentioned to me was that she thinks that I may even have to go see an infectious disease doctor, and I'm starting to get worried that like something is seriously wrong that they don't want to tell me on the phone. I remember being so devastated for the next few days. That weekend, my husband and I, we tried to distract ourselves a lot by going on a bunch of dates, but eventually we were both super nervous, and on Monday when we drove to the doctor's office, we barely said a word to each other because I was really worried something was seriously wrong. They had mentioned that they made sure that there were no cancer cells or anything. And I'm like, why are you bringing up cancer? I started getting really nervous, and we just both were like, what are they going to tell us when we get there on Monday? So we get to the doctor's office, and we go into his office, and we sit down, and the doctor was like, yeah, so I really think we need to move on. And we were like, okay, go see a specialist or something. He's like, no, I think we need to move on with the transfer. And we were like, you mean do the transfer? And he's like, yeah. And my husband and I are like, okay. I thought that's what we had already agreed on. And mind you, visits to go talk to him privately are not cheap. So we both were thinking in our heads, why are we here? Because my husband took work off to go to this appointment with me. I was freaking out all weekend, and yet he was like, yeah, I mean, here's your options. If this isn't clearing up, who's to say that it's going to prevent you from getting pregnant? It has been shown that it's possible that can happen, but there hasn't been enough data on this type of inflammation that's happening. So he's like, yeah, I mean, I think we should continue. Obviously, it's not responding. Maybe it's not going to affect it. And you could go see an infectious disease doctor, but I mean, he's probably not going to know much more about a uterus than I do. He's like, or you could get a surrogate, but that's going to cost you $90,000. So these are your options. And he's like, or you can wait it out and come back in a few months. And so my husband was like, okay, so is waiting it out maybe going to help with the inflammation? And he's like, no, but it's probably just for your peace of mind. So we were both like, okay, well, yeah, we want to do the transfer. I mean, that's what we had agreed on weeks ago, and yet here we are still having this conversation, and that ended up pushing our transfer out even further. So at this point, I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm so ready to just move on. And finally he's like, yeah, let's, we'll probably schedule it for the week of like March 12th or something. And in the meantime, let's get started on the medication. So this was kind of a really unnecessary meeting to have. And we had all these worries. And he's like, oh yeah, like you can live with inflammation in your uterus. Like it's not going to affect your health. You're not going to get sick. It's not going to cause cancer. You're fine. So I'm like, okay, I'm glad I just worried for the past 5 days for nothing. So that was like one thing that really didn't sit right with me. I didn't like that. But nonetheless, I was really excited to just move on and get this transfer done. Because at this point, had everything gone the way it should have, I would have already known if I was pregnant or not. And it just was a lot of unnecessary roadblocks, basically. So I think it wasn't until a few days later where my nurse calls me and tells me, okay, your transfer is scheduled March 10th and you're going to do all these medications and whatever started that day. So we go into our transfer March 10th. And I remember this time was just a little bit different because, you know, we had been here before, we had felt excitement. This time we were a little bit more real and we were just trying to be as calm as possible, not get too excited. And I went into this time thinking to myself that I'm not going to test for pregnancy unless I have a physical symptom like throwing up or something like that that just doesn't make sense. So March 10th, I go in and I'm on bed rest for 48 hours. I did not do that my first time, and I did decide to do it this time, and I don't regret that at all. And I went on bed rest for 2 days, and I started around that Friday or Saturday, so that would have been March 13th or 14th. I started having these really vivid dreams, I remember, and I was like, this is weird. Like my dreams are so lucid and just like wild, the wildest dreams I've ever had. And I remember thinking like, this is weird, but I'm not going to look into it because, you know, I've always had those moments of I might be pregnant and then I'm not. And so I was like, it's not enough of a symptom for me to test. And then it was that Monday, it was March 16th, and I was making breakfast, and all of a sudden I had this really horrible pain, like super, super low in my body. And I'm like, man, like this is really hurting. It kind of felt like a period cramp, but it was only in the front, super low. And I was like, what in the world is this, you know? And then like it started just getting worse and worse to the point where like I had to sit down and try to breathe through it, because at this point I'm like, okay, this is really hurting. I think I should call my nurse to ask like what medication can I take, because we know I have embryos in me. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned it, but I did put 2 in, and I just wanted to make sure that this was a normal symptom and that what could I take? So I think my husband actually called the nurse, and she told me, well, first of all, the cramping is a little odd, and the fact that you're saying it's that strong kind of worries us. Because I was in my head thinking, I think I might be starting my period, but I'm on progesterone and oil injections, so that doesn't really make sense. But, you know, crazy things have happened to me before, clearly. So we called her, and she said, as long as you're not like keeling over, can't breathe, you're fine. Just let's keep an eye out for anything worse. So I then go to the bathroom and I notice I have a little bit of pink spotting, and in my head I go, oh my God, I'm starting my period. Somehow, even while I'm on progesterone and oil, like somehow I'm starting my period. So I started getting really upset, but then it didn't really get heavier, and I was like, okay, this is weird. So I remember thinking like, this can't be implantation, spotting. I was only like 4 days or 6 days past my transfer. I was like, is this really what's going on? Like I couldn't quite figure it out. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a test in the morning because this is super weird. This has never happened to me before. And then the spotting like stopped that night. So it only happened for about 6 hours and then it just went away. So the next morning it was St. Patrick's Day and I decided to take a test. And I have been doing my progesterone and oil injections in the morning before my husband started working. So while he was preparing that for me, I went into the bathroom, I told him obviously, and I took a test. And listen, I have taken so many pregnancy tests in my life, And at this point, I don't just sit and stare at it. I kind of just set it down. I was washing my hands, and I look over at it, and I was like, oh my God, there is a line. And not only was there a line, but it was like a dark, for sure, line, second line. I couldn't believe it. I ran out of the bathroom. I told my husband, oh my God, there's a line. And he didn't really believe it because, again, like, there's been times where I'd look at a test and show him, he'd be like, I don't see anything. As soon as he saw it, he was like, yep, that's a line. And we both were like in shock still. We didn't quite believe it. We're still, this is super early. I can't get too excited, but this is the farthest we've ever come in our fertility journey. So I take this test. I'm freaking out. I call my mom. I let her know. My best friend actually just randomly happened to FaceTime me right after I found out. So I told her. I was really excited. And I just could not believe we were actually possibly pregnant. So at this point, I called my nurse and I said, okay, I know I'm not supposed to test before Friday, but I took a test. It's positive. Should I come in earlier for a blood test? And they were like, you know what? So yeah, since you were having the cramping and spotting, why don't you come in tomorrow, which would be Wednesday the 18th, and we'll do a blood test, because that way, if you are pregnant for sure, it will show up a little bit. It's still really early, and that way we can at least know what your HCG levels are, even if they're small. But yeah, come in. So the next morning I decided again, well, I'm going to take another test because I really want to know if, the line has gotten darker, because typically as long as your line is getting darker, that means your HCG levels are doubling or, getting stronger. So I took the second test, and that line was way darker than the day before. So we were starting to get really excited. I took a digital test. It said positive. I couldn't believe my eyes. And I went in for my blood test. And when they called me back, it was about noon that day or 2 p.m. or something. And they said, yep, you're pregnant. Your HCG level is 146 or 147, something like that. Amazing numbers for being this early, because mind you, I was not supposed to have my blood test until 2 days later. And at that point, I would be 15 days past ovulation. So right now I'm only 13 days past ovulation. So this was a really great number for, this early. So we were starting to get excited. We were starting to wonder, are we going to have twins? Because this just seems crazy, So we were excited. I did not test that Thursday, but I did test that Friday again, and to my amazement, my pregnancy test line was darker than the control line. So at this point, I was like, this is a strong pregnancy. This is going to be really good. I feel really good about this. And so I went in again for my HCG test. It came back. It wasn't quite double. It was 270, but they said that's really, really good still, and your numbers can double anywhere from 48 to 72 hours. So I was right on track with this pregnancy, and things were going really well. And at this point, we had told one of my husband's sisters, my mom, his dad, and my dad. So we had told everyone, okay, this actually worked for us, but please keep this a secret because we're not opening up about this quite yet. So it was that Sunday morning that I woke up and I was like, I don't really feel like I had a crazy vivid dream last night. I remember thinking that's weird. And so I took another pregnancy test because I was crazy about it this time. Now that I could just get a positive whenever I wanted, I was taking as many as I could. And so I took one, and the line was still just as dark as the control line, but I felt as though it was a little lighter than the 10 days past transfer. So I was like, that's really weird. I'm not going to look too much into it. Maybe I'm just being crazy. Maybe I didn't hold my pee long enough. I don't know, but I just remember thinking that's really weird. I feel kind of funny about this. So I was scheduled to go in to get a blood test again that Monday. So I went in, and I don't think I had a pregnancy test to take. I think I had run out at this point. And so I had gone in for blood work, and I just had this really weird feeling, and I cannot explain it to you. It was just a weird feeling. And I remember going in, getting my blood work done, coming home, and typically when I was getting my good blood work results, they were calling me between noon or 2 o'clock every day. Well, that time had passed, and I started to get this weird feeling that they were waiting to call me at the end of the day because they didn't want to call me and tell me what they were going to tell me. So I think it was around like 3:30, almost 4 o'clock that day that they called me, and the nurse was telling me that, so they had done my blood work, and unfortunately my levels had dropped by half, which is an early indication that you will have a miscarriage. But they did not want me to stop my medication because sometimes this can happen. It's super rare, and then they go back up, but it's so rare. And she just basically informed me that I need to prepare to miscarry. And when I tell you that I've never like experienced that kind of pain before, that was just like the hardest thing I've ever had to do. When I tell you that was like the hardest phone call that I ever had to take, I just don't think I've had a harder one before. And I actually kept my cool on the phone, but immediately upon hanging up, like I just lost it. And my husband didn't understand what's going on because I had like literally fallen to the floor, and I just was like wailing. Like, I've never cried harder in my life. And he was like, what's going on? What's wrong? What did they tell you? And I had to tell him, and I think he just sat there like holding me for like an hour, and I just let it all out. But I mean, I just feel like we went through so much, and then we got so excited, and we got to like be pregnant for a week, and then we were told, within such less time that you're probably going to miscarry. Because at this point I was like 5 weeks pregnant, and we were starting to feel like it was real. And so they asked me to come in again that Wednesday to confirm that I was in fact miscarrying. And so I went in, and that was the worst drive of my life. I went in by myself because at this point, I don't know if the stay-at-home order had been enacted yet or what, but basically like he wasn't going to be able to come in with me. So I went in there to, have that test done, and they called me and they said, yes, your numbers dropped again by half, so unfortunately we're going to ask you to stop your medication. And that was just really hard. I mean, it was like, now this is the end, and that's that. So I stopped the medication, and by that Sunday, so that was a Wednesday that I stopped it, that Sunday I began miscarrying, and that in itself was a really rough experience. I've never... I don't know, I'm really glad I have a really supportive husband, because he did everything he could while I was miscarrying. But it's still really hard to go through, So I got through my miscarriage, and I think I was supposed to go in for blood work that Monday, actually. So I started miscarrying Sunday. I was supposed to go in for blood work on Monday, and my husband called my nurse and was like, she just can't walk right now. She's just in a lot of pain and obviously bleeding a lot. He's like, she just can't go in right now. Can she come in the following week? Because what they had to do is they have to test out your blood every 48 hours. And you can't be cleared until you hit 0, because if by chance the baby doesn't come out all the way, you may have to get surgery and all that. And so they have to test you out. And I was like, I know I'm miscarrying right now. Please, can I come in a week later? So my nurse is so wonderful, and especially because of everything that's going on with COVID and all that, they were like, yeah, just come in a week, because, we don't want you to expose yourself to this anyway or whatever. So a week later I went in, and I got my blood work done, and she said, yeah, you're at 0. So it was kind of a relieving moment to be told you're done, you're finished with this. And she said we don't really, there's no need for me to speak with them anymore unless I want to do a 3rd cycle, and there's no need for me to keep seeing them or whatever, so that was up to me. So that is basically our frozen embryo transfer story. I know I did open up about this a lot on Instagram, and first of all, I just want to thank everyone who messaged me, who called me, who offered me resources, who sent lovely gifts, who went out of their way to help us get through this time. It was extremely difficult. It still is hard. I think it's always going to be hard. There's always going to be that loss of that. And most importantly, I just want to thank my husband for being the rock that I needed during that time, for being my strength. I know we both were going through it, but he really made sure that I was okay and that I had anything I needed during the miscarriage or whatever it was. And, currently at this point, because of everything we've been through since October, we have decided to take a break from fertility treatments, to take a break from IVF. I don't know if we're ever going to do IVF again. We still have one more shot with our insurance company to try it, but we're both just not really sure if it's going to work for us. I mean, we're 26 years old now at this moment, and we both just feel like we're so young that if it was going to work, it probably would have. I don't know. I mean, really, that's kind of our decision. Please be delicate with your words if you have advice about doing it a third time, just because we both really... It's not that we don't know that it'll work again. It's a lot on me. And I think I specifically need a break. And I know he does too emotionally, but physically my body just needs a break. It's been a long journey since last September, October. So at this point, we're taking a break. We're focusing on ourselves, on our marriage, on our home, and we're just going to live our life the way it was meant to be lived. We have a lot of plans to... just do a lot more adventurous, fun things, and we just don't really want to focus on trying to have a baby at this moment. And so that is kind of where we're at now. I am going to obviously continue my fertility podcast. I'm really excited about that. It's just a great place for me to be able to talk about everything I'm going through, give advice on things I've experienced, and also share other people's stories. I'm really excited because my next podcast should be coming out within the next 2 weeks, I think, and it's going to be all about the harmful things that people can say to someone who is trying to have a baby or going through a fertility journey. And I asked a bunch of people, what was the dumbest thing someone's ever said to you during your journey? And you guys, my mind is blown. I thought I had it bad. No, I mean, these people have said things that I'm like, I cannot believe someone said that to you. So I'm going to be sharing that. Of course, if you have a comment you want to put down below about the dumbest thing someone's ever said to you during your journey, please feel free to leave it there, or you can DM it to me on Instagram. I will put my handle down here. But I thank you guys so much for being invested in this journey, for watching this video, and my main point for doing all of this is to share my experience so that other women, other couples who are going through this, they know that they're not alone. And if you fail at your IVF journey, let me tell you, there are so many people out there who do as well. And things just happen that are unfair. But I think it's important to know that you're not alone. You're not the only one. And there's just a huge community out there. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you're not already, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below, as well as the little bell icon, so that anytime I upload a video, you are first to be notified. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.